With the launch of Season of the Haunted and sweeping sandbox changes, pulse rifles have been slowly rising to the top of the crucible. Changes like the insane healing of Solar 3.0, nerfs across the board to special weapon economy and effectiveness, in-air accuracy changes that have made hand cannons less effective, and we've seemingly found ourselves in a meta where pulses are more dominant than ever. So if you're throwing on your pulse rifle to combat the meta and wondering which pulse you should be using to dominate in the crucible, then this video is for you. Today I'm going to cover what I consider to be the best pulse rifles in the current meta that are accessible in Season of the Haunted, as well as the roles to look out for on these weapons. Now let's get into the video, and if you find these tips helpful, consider dropping a like to help support the channel. Getting into our first pulse rifle on this list is the BXR-55 Battler, and maybe part of me is choosing this because of my love for Halo, but I'm also choosing it because with the launch of Season of the Haunted, 450 RPM pulse rifles received a nice little buff. They received a buff to their range and their damage per bullet, making them more forgiving in engagements. Now, the next thing you'll find that's really nice about the BXR Battler is that it has a nice and low zoom of 20 and a clean sight, which makes for a great field of view. I hate when pulse rifles have this really zoomed in scope and you lose a lot of the surrounding area when you're focused on the target, which can make you susceptible to being flanked. Now, the other thing to really highlight about the BXR Battler is a very balanced stats overall, which I really enjoy. It's not really lacking anywhere, which is nice. It's just really well-rounded, has great reload, great handling, great stability, and really high potential range. And with the right roll, you can actually get over 48 meters of range, which makes this pulse rifle compete with a lot of other pulses that are meant to dominate in those higher ranges. Now, for where you can get this one, you want to get this from Xur and Dares of Eternity. You want to be running those Dares of Eternity, get the little treasure keys, and then you can turn them into Xur to hopefully get a BXR Battler. Now, in terms of the role I recommend and the role you're actually seeing in this gameplay, I'm running Chambered Compensator with Accurized Rounds, Killing Wind, and Rangefinder with a Range Masterwork. Don't ask me how I was so lucky to get this roll, but it is absolutely a beast. Gives me 70 range on top of Rangefinder, which brings my damage fall up to about the 48.5 meter mark, with 69 stability and 66 handling with 85 aim assist. And so overall, this just is a super balanced pulse rifle, and I feel really confident that it brings a nice mix of being able to compete in those close to mid-range gunfights, especially since with this weapon, it is a legacy PR-55 frame, which means it has dramatically increased accuracy, stability, and targeting while hip firing. So it makes it a good dueling pulse rifle, as well as a long-range pulse rifle because of Killing Wind and Rangefinder and just the overall range that you can get on this weapon. Combine that with the clean sights and the buffs it received at the beginning of this season, and the BXR Battler is easily one of my favorite pulse rifles to use right now. Next up, we have No Time to Explain, and I almost didn't want to put it on the list just because it's so popular right now, but at the same time, I had to because of just how good this pulse rifle is. So No Time to Explain lands in the 340 RPM archetype. It's gonna be one of your harder hitting pulse rifles. Comes with a great range of 80 and a nice and low zoom stat of 17. Again, creating that really open field of view to make sure we aren't getting flanked while we're laning with our pulse rifle. And the real highlight of this pulse is Time Slip, which allows you to create that wannabe arc buddy from getting multiple precision shots. And once you get 10 stacks of rewind again, you're going to be able to get your little wannabe arc buddy. And this is where you get that little portal that shoots additional shots automatically. It's like an automatic firing turret that just floats around with you on top of you shooting with your pulse. And of course, getting the catalyst for No Time to Explain only makes this little time slip portal more aggressive. And that's what really makes this weapon so good. It has great base stats on top of the fact that with time slip, you get rewarded for simply using the gun. You don't have to do anything special. You don't have to secure multiple kills. As long as you're hitting those precision shots and you're not dying, and with a pulse probably not dying since you're probably farther away, you're going to easily be able to proc Time Slip. And then once you proc Time Slip, that's when you can get really aggressive this weapon. And it literally feels like you melt people when Time Slip is active, because you literally shoot one burst and then your Time Slip fires another burst immediately, or sometimes at the exact same time. And when enemies slide out to engage you, you can tell it really catches them off guard. And it's best to not even engage you at all if you have your Time Slip up. And so that's what really makes this weapon so powerful. It's just the overall ease of use and the reward you get via Time Slip for simply using the weapon. Our next pulse rifle is Peace of Mind, and this one is nice because it can be focused at the war table in the helm and is also craftable, which we'll talk about in a minute. And this is a rapid fire frame, which means this thing absolutely melts, and it also makes it one of the best dueling archetypes in this Pulse Rifle specifically, in my opinion, is one of the best dueling pulse rifles in Destiny 2. Now, the thing you gotta keep in mind with that though is it's gonna lack range. So it's definitely a pulse rifle you wanna play within its optimal range, because in that optimal range, this thing is going to absolutely destroy. And I would argue even in a little bit closer to the long ranges, this thing is still gonna melt pretty quickly, just because of how quickly you can empty the magazine with this weapon. And now, as I mentioned, this weapon is craftable, which is awesome because then it makes getting the god roll on this weapon attainable. What I recommend for peace of mind, for the god roll, you're going to want arrowhead break, because it's going to give you plus 30 recoil direction, which even on mouse and keyboard just makes this weapon so much more controllable and allows you to be that much more accurate with this pulse. And then from there, you're going to ricochet rounds. It's going to continue to boost your range and give you plus 10 stability, which is going to again help with the overall control on this weapon. And then from there, I would recommend overflow. I don't know if I would go enhanced overflow and use those materials, but with overflow, you get 72 rounds in the magazine, and on a rapid fire frame pulse rifle like this one that fires as fast as this, having overflow is just a game changer. You can absolutely just unload your clip into the enemy and not have to worry about reloading frequently. And then from there, I do recommend moving target or enhanced moving target, just to make this weapon's reticle that much more sticky on your enemies and that much more forgiving, because you're going to be constantly moving around and aiming down sights and kind of slowly walking around, and having this to give you that plus 10 aim assist at all times while you're aiming down sights is going to be really nice to have. With, of course, I would go range masterwork, and that's going to give us 46 range, 56 stability, and 37 handling. And that's the only real downside outside of the range on this weapon, is that handling is kind of low. But again, because it's craftable, you could adjust that for the handling if you wanted to, but overall, this would be the roll I would recommend. Next up, we have New Purpose, one of the newer pulse rifles of the game, which can be obtained via the Duality Dungeon. This is a legendary 340 kinetic pulse rifle, meaning it's hard hitting and has the potential to 2-burst Guardians. And the thing I really love about New Purpose is it has a cleaner sight than Messenger, which actually isn't attainable this season. And as typical of 340 pulse rifles, it's going to bring strong range and stability, but you're going to see the handling is really lacking on this weapon. And that's where you're going to really want to consider if you're like a Warlock using Apathettic aspect, really shoot up that handling to really compensate for how low it is on this weapon, or you're going to find it feels a little bit sluggish. Now, in terms of the god roll I recommend on this weapon, for the sight, I recommend running small bore, which can give you that stability and range, and then ricochet rounds, again, for more stability and range, and then perpetual motion is going to give you those growing stacks of stability, handling, and reload as long as you keep moving, which is a pretty free way to get that little handling boost, because like we talked about earlier, that is really the one big downside on this weapon. For the last column, we're kind of between two perks here, between Desperado, which is pretty popular, and Harmony. And Desperado did get recently nerfed. I still think it's a great option, so I wouldn't be upset if I got this roll on my New Purpose, but I've actually been really preferring Harmony. With Harmony, it's really nice because you can pair it with something like an SMG, and once you get that SMG kill, you can switch back to your New Purpose with Harmony procced, and it's going to give you plus 20% damage increase and 15 handling for 7 seconds. So again, something else that's going to help overcome the biggest weakness from a stat perspective on this weapon, and of course, on top of that damage boost, making this easy to burst once you get Harmony procced. And it's just the best feeling when you get that kill with your SMG or another weapon, and then switch, and knowing you have Harmony procced, you can then be really aggressive with your New Purpose. So I highly recommend grinding for this pulse and the Harmony roll over Desperado. But again, if you get Desperado, prefer Desperado, no hard feelings there. Insidious is the next pulse rifle on our list, and this is probably the least accessible pulse rifle of them all, since you do have to run Valve the Disciple raid to obtain this pulse rifle. And this pulse rifle is a 450 RPM aggressive burst frame archetype, which means it fires 4 rounds in each burst and can 2-burst Guardians, and at base is going to have great range. And overall, the sight on this weapon is relatively clean. It's probably not the cleanest out of the bunch we've covered so far, but it is clean enough to where you can still see your peripherals and not get flanked super easily while you're aiming down sights. Now, the other thing that's cool about this pulse, kind of like peace of mind, is it is craftable, but unless you love raiding, I don't know if it's going to be worth it on this weapon, because chances are you're still going to be able to get a pretty good roll from running Valve the Disciple. But again, if you want to run it to the point where you can craft it, more power to you. Now getting into what I consider the god roll on this weapon, we're going to be starting with small bore. That's going to give us a nice little +7 to stability and a considerable boost to range. And then from there, I'm going accurized rounds, which again is going to give us even more range and actually bring the overall range stat with the range masterwork to 100. And then from there, I recommend rapid hit. It's going to really help with that stability on this weapon and just really help with the overall flinch you could take while using this weapon, as long as you're getting those hits with those burst hits while using rapid hit. From there, I do like Adrenaline Junkie just to give it some extra damage as you get kills or get kills with your grenades, just to make this weapon that much more lethal. Overall, the thing I love most about Insidious is the fact that it rolls with rapid hit, which on pulses, it's super easy to build up those stacks really quickly just from one burst, which allows you to spec into other things because you're always going to have that really high boost of stability from rapid hit. So it allows to spec more into things like range and other things like that, or handling whatever you feel is most beneficial to your playstyle. Overall, you can't go wrong with any of the pulse rifles I mentioned here today. Whatever pulse is most accessible to you and fits your playstyle best will be the best choice out of the pulses we covered here. And if you enjoyed this video and want to improve your aim with any weapon in Destiny 2, check out my aim improvement video at the top, or for my latest Warlock build, check out the video at the bottom.